Next to speak is our comrade, Chris Williamson. Chris has been the only MP who dared to stand with those in the Labour Party and the Labour movement who were falsely accused of being anti-Semites. And for that, he was hounded out of the Labour Party. We might have differences with the comrade on our attitude to the Labour Party today, but we continue to campaign side by side and in a very comradely way. We're very honoured to have you with us. Hello, Chris.
Thanks very much indeed for that introduction, Tina. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I was literally the only MP that was prepared to stand up to the witch hunt, to defend comrades who'd been falsely accused. The fact that I'd stood by Jackie Walker and Ken Livingstone and Mark Wadsworth was then used against me. And I think part of the problem we have, or the problem that we have, is that the political class has been captured in this country on both sides of the chamber in the House of Commons. All political parties have been captured by the Zionist lobby and by corporate capitalism, I regret to say. And that includes, obviously, the Labour Party. And when Jeremy Corbyn came onto the scene, of course, he threatened the status quo. And there was a concerted attempt, as we're all well aware, to undermine him and to use every dirty trick in the book to destabilise his leadership and to ultimately topple Jeremy Corbyn and to destroy any notion that the Labour Party might be able to implement a modest socialist domestic programme and an anti-imperialist foreign policy. And part of the problem was, you know, the grassroots, those who claim to be socialists in the so-called socialist campaign group of Labour MPs, failed to speak out sufficiently. It's got to be said that it was the apologists for Israel, it was the apologists for neoliberalism and the military-industrial complex. They are the people that made the running. They're the people that ensured that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership was brought to an end. And we didn't push back strongly enough. The grassroots didn't push back strongly enough. The socialist campaign group of Labour MPs didn't push back strongly enough at all. And we allowed comrades to be literally thrown under the bus one by one. I've described them as Jeremy Corbyn's Praetorian Guard were being systematically destroyed. And an old Jewish fellow who knows somebody who told me that he'd said to her, the problem with Jeremy was that he was treating his friends as his enemies and his enemies as his friends. Now, that might be a bit too strong, but that was in reality what was happening, because it was people like Tom Watson and Margaret Hodge and various others in the Parliamentary Labour Party who were using very robust language to attack Jeremy Corbyn. Everybody is, I'm sure, well aware of the abuse that Margaret Hodge meted out to Jeremy behind the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons chamber. And no action was taken against her, and very muted response to that outrageous confrontation that Jeremy was subjected to by her. I think things really started to go wrong, frankly, in terms of free speech, and go wrong for the whole project of an anti-imperialist foreign policy and a socialist domestic agenda, when the Labour National Executive Committee agreed to adopt the IHRA working definition of, or examples of anti-Semitism in their working definition. And that really, I think, in many ways was the first domino. And we've seen as a consequence of that, the situation getting completely out of hand. And many of us, and I remember being asked by the Jewish Voice for Labour to speak at a rally outside the Labour Party National Executive Committee meeting against the adoption, the full adoption of the IHRA examples. There was a huge rally there in support of that. I think there was overwhelming support, it's got to be said, amongst the grassroots for the party not to go down that road. But despite our best endeavours, the NEC in its wisdom, the leadership in its wisdom, they agreed to adopt it. And we've seen the consequences of that, of course. It's seen the witch hunt being stepped up inside the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party as well, of course. And I regret to say it's useful idiots. It's people like Owen Jones and the Optics Left who helped to facilitate the enemies of a socialist domestic agenda at home and an anti-imperialist foreign policy at home. They were falling over themselves to throw people like me and Jackie and others under the bus. An outrageous state of affairs. And of course, we know the role that the newspapers like The Guardian played in all that as well. And of course, as that led to us, that's led us to a situation where, as Graham has mentioned, and indeed Tina in her opening remarks, of Gavin Williamson, now no relation, I've got to say, threatening now universities with a funding cut if they don't adopt the IHRA. Now, it was wonderful, and Graham mentioned this, to see the UCU, I beg your pardon's, academic board retracting the IHRA, and that's a welcome step, and we need to see more of that. And we need to, I think, ratchet up the support for the action that they've taken, because part of the problem, I think, for me is, and one of the reasons why I was pushing the Socialist Campaign Group to be more robust on a range of different issues, actually, was that we needed to create the space, really, for Jeremy and others, John McDonnell and so on, to actually be more radical and to go further and to, be able to stand up to the witch hunt. But that didn't happen. And so I think it's really important that we raise our voices in support of the UCU's decision and to press other universities which are going in the opposite direction. But we're seeing careers destroyed. The academics are being targeted, as we know. People like Nathan Robertson, albeit a US-based Guardian journalist, sacked over a satirical tweet, for goodness sake. I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with what he said. I've got it here. This tweet said, a couple of tweets, did you know that the US Congress is not actually allowed to authorize any new spending unless a portion of it's directed towards buying weapons for Israel? It's the law. And they clarified that by saying, if not the written law, then so ingrained in political custom as to functionally be indistinguishable from law. Now, he lost his job as a consequence of that. And, there was a lot of truth in what he was saying. I mean, 20% of Israel's defense budget comes in the form of US aid. And then, of course, we've seen the spectacle of people like Ken Loach being witch hunted, and Oxford University apologizing for the fact that an event that hosted him took place on the university campus. He was accused of having a history of blatant anti-Semitism. This is a complete lie. And we absolutely, therefore, have to speak out as loudly as we possibly can and demand others speak out loudly. People who are supposed to be socialists inside the Labour Party, people who are supposed to stand up and support the Palestinian people, people who claim to favour an ethical foreign policy, their voices need to be heard, and we need to be pushing them to actually raise those voices. And then we've got people like Kerry-Ann Mendoza, the editor-at-large of the Canary, being targeted by the Liberal Democrats in Wales, and indeed the organisation Yes Cymru, the Welsh independence campaign, because they had the temerity to admit Kerry-Ann into their membership. She's been targeted by the Liberal Democrats as an out-and-out anti-Semite. Absolutely despicable. And then we're seeing organisations like YouTube sort of demonetizing and deplatforming platforms that essentially, peace platforms, but people like, Lee Camp and Graham Elwood, who put the case for peace and for justice, and they're seeing their platforms taken down and demonetized. So there is a real substantial attack. It hasn't gone away. If anything, it's intensified since Jeremy Corbyn stepped down. We've seen that. Obviously, Jeremy now has been suspended from the party. I think he's on course to be expelled from the Labour Party. And we therefore have to put a line in the sand. I mean, I've been urging this line in the sand to be drawn years ago. It never was. But we've absolutely got to make a stand now, because it's very, very, very dangerous. It's not simply the Labour Party that is at risk here. It's our freedoms right across the piece. And I've already said, in terms of academia, in terms of the media, in terms of having the opportunity to have a platform to speak out against injustice, not just about Israel, on a range of different topics. Unless we make this stand, then it's a very, very, very slippery slope, and very dangerous slippery slope. And so it's about solidarity. It's about standing together. We need to come together and make this case as robustly as we can to ensure that we can push back. And I'm hopeful that if we do that, we will succeed.
Thank you very much, Comrade.